Hi, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your yearly horoscope forecast for the sign of Scorpio for the entire year ahead of 2022. If you're new to my channel, then my name is Chris Brennan, and I'm the host of the Astrology podcast and the author of a book on ancient astrology titled Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune. So in my approach, I synthesize a little bit of ancient and a little bit of modern astrology in order to get the best of both worlds. So each week I release new podcasts and videos on astrology on my channel. So if you'd like to get notifications when I release a new video, then please hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. And if you enjoy this video, then please consider hitting the like button to show me that you enjoyed the content and you'd like to see more of it. Okay, so my horoscopes are primarily meant to be read relative to your rising sign or your ascendant sign, which are essentially the same things. Although you can also watch them from the perspective of your sun sign, especially if you're born during the day, or your moon sign, especially if you're born at night. So the rising sign changes signs every hour or two during the course of the day, whereas the moon sign takes about 2 days to change signs, and the sun sign takes about a month to change signs. So as a result of that, the rising sign is much more personally relevant to you, and for that reason, I would really focus on that when you're looking at these horoscopes, or horoscopes in general for that matter. So if you don't know what your rising sign is, then all you need to do is find out your birth time and then go to a website where you can get your birth chart calculated, such as astro.com, and you should be able to get your ascendant or your birth rising sign calculated on those websites. So I have a video tutorial titled How to Calculate Your Ascendant and Rising Sign on my channel, which you can either search for or I'll put a link to it in the upper corner of this video right here. So let me know in the comments below what your sun, moon, and rising signs are, and which sign resonates with you more when you watch your video horoscopes like this one. All right, Scorpio, you brilliant diabolical bastards, let's take a look at your transits for 2022. So here's a transit graph that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and where they will end up by the end of the year in terms of their progress through the signs of the zodiac. Here's some of the main transits I want to talk about this year for you for 2022. So let's first talk about the Venus retrograde in Capricorn in your third house. So this is a transit that already started actually late last year when Venus went retrograde in December of 2021 in Capricorn in your third house of communication, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, and extended relatives. And Venus went retrograde conjunct Pluto, which is kind of a tricky transit, kind of a difficult transit. But this transit's going to be active actually off and on all the way through early March, because it's not until early March that Venus will eventually not just stop being retrograde, but also depart from Capricorn and move into Aquarius on March 6th. So here's your chart. There's your third house and Venus, where it's going retrograde, conjunct the planet Pluto. So this transit can sometimes lead to needing to go back and revise or dredge up old things pertaining to the past or pertaining to social relationships with third house individuals. So this can be, if you have any siblings, there can be some major things going on either in their life or in terms of your relationship with them, and needing to renegotiate things. So this may be a little bit tricky because since Venus stationed conjunct Pluto, Pluto often brings an element of manipulation, of power plays, of control issues, and Venus-Pluto conjunctions can be very intense and somewhat obsessive or prone towards going to extremes rather than in the middle or things staying moderate. So it may have you renegotiating things in terms of your siblings or in terms of other third house people can be neighbors and difficulties in needing to renegotiate social contracts involving your neighbors. It can also indicate extended relatives and families such as aunts and uncles and cousins and things of that nature. In some instances, the third house can relate to travel, like short distance travel or things in your neighborhood and your immediate vicinity in some way, like outside of your house, but still relatively in your own city. and things that are going on or changing or having to be renegotiated there. So since Venus retrograde goes retrograde in the sign of Capricorn every 8 years, some of the things coming up during this time may be related to events that occurred or echoes of events that occurred in your life in this same area, either 8 years ago or 16 years ago or 24 years ago, depending on how old you are, since Venus will just keep going retrograde in Capricorn for the most part every 8 years, so you can count back pretty easily. So sometimes if you think back to those previous retrograde periods, it can give you some insight into how things are going to go during this one, as well as some of the things that you might need to deal with or revisit over the course of the next couple of months. So some of these themes are going to be actually intensified starting in late January, not just because Venus is going to station direct in Capricorn, but also because Mars is going to ingress into Capricorn on the 24th of January and join Venus and begin conjoining Venus off and on over the course of the next month or two. So Mars can speed up the events and the pace of things, so you may find yourself having to do a lot more communication, a lot more short distance travel, or having a lot more interactions and having to put more energy and effort into your relationship with different third house parties such as siblings, neighbors, or extended relatives. That's the best case positive, constructive scenario, especially for those of you with day charts where this could be a more constructive or a somewhat more positive transit. For those of you with night charts, some of the more challenging sides of Mars might come out, which have to do with things like strife, conflict, anger, discord, and sometimes even severing or separation. So one of the general themes, anytime you have a third house transit, is communication. So one of the things you might want to be careful about is getting into verbal altercations or arguments with people during this time. You may find yourself either being more argumentative or potentially just saying something in the heat of the moment that perhaps you regret later that could lead to some sort of severing or separation or falling out with some sort of third house person, some sort of third house party. So here's a list of significations for each of the 12 houses, where it lists the third house as being associated with siblings, short trips, school, and communication. Sometimes friends can also go in the third house, so that might be a good one to be a little bit careful about there in terms of discord. Third house Mars transits, also be careful when traveling. Don't speed in your car because that could be dangerous. Don't otherwise take unnecessary risks while traveling during this time. And also just be careful in terms of interactions with other third house parties, not to get into unnecessary conflicts or do something impulsive that you later regret when it comes to potentially severing or separating yourself from a relationship. Now, of course, there's some scenarios where if a relationship is not constructive or is not serving you well or is somehow undermining you and you have to cut it out of your life, then that may, be the case during this time period, and that can still be a constructive use of that transit, even if it's somewhat challenging or somewhat unpleasant subjectively. All right, so that transit is going to end pretty much simultaneously on the same day on March 6th, when both Venus departs from Capricorn in your third house and Mars also departs from your third house on the very same day. So that gives us a sort of end point for that transit. The next transit I wanted to talk about is Jupiter has recently ingressed or moved into Pisces, which is your fifth house. And the fifth house has to do with topics like children, creativity, but also things like pleasure or sex and sexual activity, or your orientation towards sexuality in general. So here is Jupiter going through your fifth house. Jupiter's the planet of growth, optimism, expansion, and it can indicate a period of growth and optimism in this area when it comes to things like children, for example. For some people, if they were planning on having children or they wanted to have children, this could be a period in which they conceive or have children at this time. If some people have been having problems having children or there's been an inability to, In some instances, this can be a good period in order to attempt to seek treatments in order to see if you can successfully conceive. For some people, if you already have grown children, it may just indicate a positive period in terms of your relationship with your children or in terms of some events and circumstances that are taking place in their life over the course of the different parts of this year, especially the first 4 months, because Jupiter's only going to be in Pisces primarily up until about May 10th. Other things, it can be a good period for creative matters for those that are artistic. If you have any sort of creative impulse, or if that's something that you'd like to explore, it can be a period of success and learning new things and learning new artistic techniques for creativity and expressing yourself. And then finally, it can also be a period of just growth and development in terms of your orientation towards sex and sexuality in general. For some people, it can be like developing a new romantic interest with somebody or a new casual relationship that goes relatively well, especially in the first 4 months of this year. The only downside to be a little bit careful about is in early April, Jupiter is going to conjoin the planet Neptune in your fifth house, and Neptune can be very good for creative matters. So this could actually increase your ability and your creative output and your ability to sort of like channel a sort of higher level ability to create authentic worlds and on authentic or immersive experiences in terms of artistic expression. So that's definitely best case scenario for the Jupiter conjunct Neptune transit in your fifth house and in terms of creativity. You might want to be a little bit careful because sometimes in terms of romantic relationships, Neptune can be a little bit deceptive. So there can be issues involving truth or things not appearing, not being quite as good as they appear at first. So if there was some sort of romantic involvement or some sort of tryst, the person could come off as being much better or much more like spiritually or philosophically high-minded than they actually turn out to be in retrospect. The thing about Neptune transits, though, is you don't often know until it's over what was really going on in reality, because typically when you're going through a Neptune transit, it seems very beautiful and it seems very engaging at the time. So for many of you, the advice is just to enjoy it because it's going to be a nice transit, but just try not to get too carried away and keep one foot on the ground to stay a little bit grounded when it comes to some of these relationships and other things that occur during this time. All right, so that's happening just the first few months of the year when we have Jupiter going through Pisces up until May 10th. It does come back again very briefly from October 28th through December 20th. But the next thing I wanted to talk about, besides the Jupiter conjunct Neptune transit and Jupiter going through Pisces, is the transit of Jupiter into Aries, which takes place May 10th and then stays there all the way until October 28th. So when Jupiter moves from Pisces into Aries, it's going to be going into your sixth house of work and health. So this can be a positive period of growth and expansion when it comes to your workplace. Some people can get a new job or get a promotion at their current job or just start a new phase in their job where things are going relatively smoothly and relatively successfully. If you own your own business or if you find yourself in a managerial role, then Jupiter transits through your sixth house can be just having good interactions with people who work for you. It can be hiring somebody that turns out to be very helpful and bring a much more optimistic and growth-oriented vibe into your workplace as a result of being involved in your work. Other scenarios for Jupiter in the sixth house transit, the sixth house is also the place of health, and especially in terms of Jupiter transits can sometimes be good for addressing health issues that maybe were problematic or that had escaped you in the past, but finding good ways to deal with and address and get help with those matters in the present. So if there's something that kind of escaped you in the past, now might be a good time to seek new treatments or get medical advice from a doctor. And in some instances, that advice might work out a little bit better during this time frame as you have Jupiter going through your sixth house of health and work. So any ways that you can improve your health, like starting a new diet or exercise regime, would be positive or constructive ways to make the most out of this transit during that time. So definitely give it a shot. All right, so the time frame for that transit, as I said, is May 10th through October 28th primarily, but Jupiter is actually going to come back to Aries starting December 20th, all the way through May of 2023. So it's a two-part transit, part of which is in the second half of this year, and part of which is in the first half of next year. So that looks pretty good. All right, so next transit I want to move on to is talking about Saturn going through the second half of Aquarius through your fourth house of home and family and living situation and your private life. So this is a transit where Saturn first dipped into Aquarius in about March or April of 2020 for a brief period of time. So here's your fourth house, there's Saturn, there's Aquarius. So that initial brief, like 2 or 3 month dip of Saturn into Aquarius happened at the same time as the Mars-Saturn conjunction. So for some people, it was kind of like a difficult period or a crisis period in the area of either their home and living situation or their relationship with their parents or in their parents' lives in general. So eventually, Saturn retrograded back out into Capricorn for most of the second half of 2020, and then it came back into Aquarius fully, I believe around December of 2020, and it's been there for basically the entirety of the past year. So part of what's important about that is the major themes that this transit is about. Since Saturn's already like halfway through Aquarius at this point, most of those fourth house themes have probably already started to come up, and you're probably already dealing with them in your life in some ways. So this is not like new to you. It's just the continuation and eventually the wrapping up over the course of the next year of some of these major themes in terms of your fourth house. So for some people, Saturn transits through the fourth, it can be surmountable difficulties in terms of your home and your living situation, or in terms of your relationship with your parents. So there can be some issues that come up, but it's like that cliche, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type scenario, where through great effort and like pushing and working through something, you're eventually able to overcome it, even though it was something that was like long and laborious and you didn't necessarily want to do, but you sort of felt an obligation to do it in this area of your life. So there's that scenario, and especially for those of you with day charts, I think you would have a more constructive version of that, where it just has to do with putting in effort, putting in the work in terms of your home and living situation and parents and private life, and then eventually coming out the other side of it stronger and with a better foundation as a result. So restructuring your foundations in this area is one of the major themes. Now, there is another scenario where sometimes Saturn can indicate an area where there's a insurmountable difficulty, where Saturn puts up a stop sign and says that you cannot proceed further with the path that you've been taking in this specific area of your life up to this point, in which case you basically just have to pick a different path and start heading in a different direction, which you may not be super happy about or super excited about, but a good thing to remember is just in the long term, sometimes Saturn, when it closes one door on one area of our life, it can end up opening up another door down the line, which we don't see at first because we can only just see the experience of having that first door sort of closed when it comes to that relationship or that situation in terms of our living situation. And we can't initially see that somewhat negative subjective experience is happening in order to send us on a path that will provide us with other opportunities in the future. But I think it's good to just keep in mind that that's a very likely scenario and possibility when it comes to this transit. So Saturn's going to be moving its way through the second half of Aquarius and wrapping that transit up. And eventually Saturn will depart from Aquarius and move into Pisces in March of 2023. So this is really the last year of this Saturn transit through your fourth house. All right, so other things related to Saturn. I think there is going to be a Mars-Saturn conjunction that's coming up where there could be a quickening and an acuteness to some of the Saturn issues through your fourth house, especially for those of you with day charts. It's a little bit of a repetition of the Mars-Saturn conjunction that we had back in April of 2020, March and April of 2020. So it goes exact starting on April 4th and 5th, as we can see in this graph from Archetypal Explorer, where it shows the sort of configuration peaking in intensity at that time around the beginning of April. However, the transit really begins on March 6th, as soon as Mars moves into Aquarius, because that's when it moves into your fourth house of home and living situation and parents. And that transit is not complete until Mars departs from that sign April 14th and moves into Pisces. So, as I said before, Mars transits can sometimes just quicken the pace of events and make you focus on that area of your life and put much more energy and work into it. In this case, either into your home and living situation or towards your parents during this time. But sometimes with a Mars-Saturn conjunction, it can feel like two opposite energies that are pulling us in entirely different directions, which can cause sometimes a lot of tension and a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress in that area of our life for a short period of time of about a month or a month and a half. So for some of you, this is going to be felt like more of an acute period where there could be the need to take some sort of decisive action in order to figure out how to move forward. So decisive action is one of Mars's more constructive traits. In other scenarios, it could be a period in which some of those themes of anger or of strife or discord could become more prominent in terms of your home and living situation. You could get into a fight with your parents or have some sort of falling out, or maybe they just have something going on in their life that's sort of independent of you, but that's still being reflected in your chart. In general, it's just good to be cautious and to exercise caution and restraint during this time, especially during the course of the Mars transit, so that you don't do anything that you regret later on and that you take actions that are very deliberate, so that you know what you're doing and you know what the outcome is going to be, rather than just shooting from the hip and sort of asking questions later, which may be part of the impulse when you're having a Mars transit through the fourth house. All right, so that's relevant. The other thing that's relevant in terms of your Saturn transit that I wanted to mention is Saturn has been squaring Uranus off and on over the course of the past year. We had 3 exact squares of Uranus in 2021, and that was one of the primary astrological signatures of last year. However, as we can see on this graph from Archetypal Explorer, the Saturn-Uranus square is going to come back and get extremely close again in the third quarter of 2022, peaking around September and October of 2022. So this square between Saturn and Uranus is Saturn transiting your fourth house of home and family and living situation and your private life, and Uranus, which has been transiting your seventh house of relationships and partnership and other people in your life in general. So there's some sort of tension here between your home life and your relationship life that may be coming to a head during this period. Now, we've already seen some of this tension come out over the course of the past year, so it shouldn't necessarily be something new. It could just be a continuation and the sort of conclusion and resolution of some themes that you've already been riding out over the course of 2021 in terms of tensions between your fourth house and your seventh house. But Uranus sometimes, especially this year, it's going to get activated and emphasized by the fact that eclipses are starting to take place in your seventh house of relationships, which is going to accentuate and really put more of the spotlight on your seventh house of relationships. So Uranus itself has been transiting through Taurus for the past few years, and this can sometimes bring somewhat radical, somewhat unexpected changes when it comes to your seventh house of relationships and partnership, either in terms of your orientation towards relationships or in terms of things that are happening in your partner's life if you have a long-term relationship of some sort. If you don't, sometimes Uranus transits, and especially eclipses, can bring a new relationship into your life unexpectedly. Although with Uranus, sometimes things can be very erratic or somewhat up and down. So in the fourth quarter especially, I would pay attention to some potential for tensions between your fourth house of your home and living situation and parents and private life and your seventh house of relationships. But this really brings me into something that's going to be happening off and on in terms of the eclipses all year, and that I wanted to touch on next, which is this year we have a set of two pairs of eclipses that are going to be bouncing back and forth between the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, which is your first house of self and body and mind, and your seventh house of relationships, partnership, marriage, and other people in your life. So we talked about the seventh house earlier. That's where some of the eclipses are going to take place. And your first house of self is where the other eclipses are going to take place. So my primary keyword for eclipses is they tend to indicate major beginnings and major endings. And some of the most positive and negative things that happen in a person's life tend to be foreshadowed by eclipses that happen shortly before those events take place. So when it comes to eclipses in the seventh house, sometimes that can indicate the beginning of major relationships. And then what happens is you spend the next year or the next 6 months bouncing back and forth between being in a relationship and sort of finding out what it takes in terms of giving your energy to another person and the sort of give and take of what it means to be in a partnership with that person and have them involved as an integral part in your life, versus trying to balance that out and seesawing back and forth with your first house and figuring out what you need in your life, becoming more clear about your own personal identity and sense of self and selfhood, who you are, how you appear to the world, and how you wish to present yourself to the world, and finding some sort of balance between those two areas, which can be kind of tough. And I usually see it as something as like a process that a person goes back and forth through at different points during the course of a year in which they have eclipses going back and forth like this, where during some parts of the year, they'll put more emphasis on one side, and on other parts of the year, they'll put more emphasis on the other side. So sometimes you'll be emphasizing more yourself, and other times you'll be emphasizing more relationships. So major beginnings, major endings when it comes to self and relationships. If you're in a long-term relationship, sometimes that can indicate if the relationship has started to wind down, or if it's not working out for you for some reason, it can indicate the end of a major relationship, or perhaps just the end of one major chapter in your relationship and the beginning of a new chapter. So sometimes in a long-term relationship, this can be about needing to start some sort of new beginning when it comes to relationships in your life, which will then carry forward for many years into the future. There's a lot of stuff going on with Uranus. Let's see, besides the eclipses, Uranus, Saturn, I think that's pretty good. I mean, some of the need for liberation and change indicated by Uranus, because one of the things is a lot of the eclipses, at least two of them, are very closely tied in with Uranus and are going to be activating that transit in your seventh house this year. So there could be some need for liberation, some unexpected disruptions, or just an impulse to do things differently and a need to like shake things up and maybe spice things up when it comes to relationships in some way. Yeah, let me show the dates for the eclipses. That's what I'm forgetting. So the first set of eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio are going to take place between April 30th and May 16th. And then the second set of eclipses are going to take place October 25th and then November 8th. So that gives you some time frames in terms of the eclipses, and each of them initiate a 6-month, they sort of bookend a 6-month chapter. So it's not that everything happens right away as soon as an eclipse takes place usually, but instead when an eclipse happens in a certain part of your chart, it usually opens up a whole 6-month window from that point forward where the topics of that house are then activated in some way. So again, activating your seventh house of relationships and your first house of self. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to mention is the Mars retrograde transit, which is going to take place in Gemini this year in your 8th house of other people's money, finances, mortality, the assets of others. Sometimes it can indicate inheritance or debt or taxes or other things like that. This transit is going to begin around August 20th when Mars moves into the sign of Gemini. And the transit and some of the situations or scenarios surrounding it are going to start building up slowly at that point. So Mars transits through the 8th house can sometimes indicate a period in which you're putting a lot of energy into other people's money and developing money in concert with somebody else, like either a marriage or relationship partner or potentially a business partner in some instances. But this is going to be a period where things are sort of moving forward, but then all of a sudden Mars slows down and it will turn around and do a U-turn in Gemini and station retrograde on October 30th. There it is. October 30th is the Mars station. And at this time, sometimes like Mars significations become much more intense. And there's some sort of turning point with respect to activities that are going on that had been building up since August, but come to some sort of culmination at that point when Mars turns around and starts retracing its steps through the sign of Gemini. So sometimes this can bring up more challenging Mars-related significations related to things like strife or difficulty or fights and conflict when it comes to financial matters involving other people. Since the 8th house is also the house of mortality, sometimes issues related to mortality can come up, which it can include topics like inheritance and potentially like a fight or a conflict involving an inheritance, if that's something that you're expecting for some reason. In general, just ideas surrounding your own mortality and longevity, as well as those of others around you, can sometimes become more of a focal point during the course of a long-term 8th house transit like this, which will last for, I think, at least 6 months. Because even though it starts in August, the Mars retrograde period itself doesn't begin until October 30th. Then it's going to be retrograde for a while, and then eventually it's going to station direct and eventually won't actually leave Gemini until sometime early in 2023. So this is kind of a long, drawn-out transit that will happen towards the end of the year, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight it as one of my major transits for you this year, because I think it's going to be one of the more notable ones that's up there on my list, along with the Jupiter transits through your 5th and 6th houses and the Venus and Saturn transits, as well as the eclipses. But I think that's it in terms of major transits. Let me go through my diagrams really quickly and make sure I didn't forget or leave anything out. But I think we're in pretty good shape, and this is looking pretty good. So those are, for the most part, your transits for the entire year of 2022. So good luck and let me know how it goes, and I'll see you again in 2023. All right, that's it for this horoscope forecast for 2022. So as always, this was just a general forecast that focuses on some of the broad outlines of the year ahead. So if you'd like a more detailed analysis of some of the general transits this year, then be sure to check out our year ahead forecast for 2022 that we released in December. Additionally, for a more detailed analysis of your chart, you might want to get a consultation with an astrologer, because they can look at it in much more detail than I can go into here in just a general horoscope. Alternatively, or better yet, you could also learn how to read your birth chart and transits on your own, which would allow you to pinpoint some of the dates involved with much more precision and exactness. So if you'd like to learn more about my approach to astrology, then you can get a copy of my book titled Hellenistic Astrology, the Study of Fate and Fortune. And in this book, I reconstructed the original system of Western astrology and recovered some techniques that we had lost many centuries ago. So with this book, I sort of teach you how to read a birth chart and how to use different timing techniques in order to determine when different things will happen during the course of your life, or in some instances during the course of a single year, as I've attempted to do in this horoscope forecast. So the book is available on Amazon as well as in other fine bookstores everywhere. I also teach an online course on ancient astrology, which has over 100 hours of video lectures. It shows hundreds of different example charts in order to show you how the different techniques work in practice. And it really gets into details that I couldn't go into as much in my book, even though the book is very big. In the course, I actually get into a lot more example charts, which really gives you better hands-on experience of how to use astrology to read birth charts in practice. So you can find out more information about that at courses.theastrologyschool.com. And finally, I also recently released my 2022 electional astrology report, where I went through the year and I picked out some of the most auspicious or lucky dates with one lucky date or electional chart for each of the next 12 months. So these are useful for starting different types of ventures and undertakings using the principles of electional astrology. The report is also available at courses.theastrologyschool.com. All right, so that's it. So thanks for watching. Good luck in 2022, and may the stars be ever in your favor. Special thanks to all the patrons that supported the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, thanks to the patrons on our producers tier, including Thomas Miller, Catherine Conroy, Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Sumo Kopic, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Morgan McKinsey, and Kristen Otero. If you like the work that I'm doing here on the podcast and you would like to find a way to support it, then please consider becoming a patron through my page on patreon.com. And in exchange, you'll get access to bonus content such as early access to new episodes, the ability to attend the live recording of the month ahead forecast each month, access to a private monthly auspicious elections report that we put out each month, access to exclusive episodes that are only available for patrons, or you can also get your name listed in the credits at the end of each episode. For more information, go to patreon.com/astrologypodcast. The main software we use here on the podcast to look at astrological charts is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available at alabe.com, and you can use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we use a similar set of software by the same programming team called AstroGold for Mac OS, which is available from astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount on that as well. Also, special thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is available at mountainastrologer.com, the Honeycomb Collective Personal Astrological Almanacs, available at honeycomb.co, and the AstroGold Astrology app, which is available for both iPhone and Android at astrogold.io. There are also two major astrology conferences happening this year. The first is the Northwest Astrological Conference, happening May 26th through the 30th, 2022, near Seattle, Washington. Find out more information at norwac.net. And the second is the International Society for Astrological Research Conference, which is taking place August 25th through the 29th, 2022, in Westminster, Colorado. And you can find out more information about that at isar2022.org.